We are going to get right into it now. This presentation will cover all the basics of the on-campus housing bill. That includes how and where you can pay your bill, when housing payments are due, what payment methods are accepted, and examples of the housing billing cycle and the resident portal. Other frequently asked questions that this presentation will touch on are how financial aid funds may be applicable towards your bill. That's a big one. We're going to go into that just because there's some interesting details there. And also what a late or missed payment entails. Getting right into it, one thing I will highlight, this lovely little QR code does take you to our floor plans and room rates page on the on-campus housing website. You can also access the overall website via the link I sent in the chat. But if you remember nothing else from this presentation, I very much encourage you to remember these three big pieces. On-campus housing is billed separately from your other university costs. That includes tuition and meal plan. So on-campus housing is not going to be billed through Wiser. It is instead accessible through your resident portal. All of you have already been to the resident portal at one point or another to sign your housing license agreement. So you have already gotten familiar with that. That is also going to be the place where you access your on-campus housing bill. One other thing I'll say about that, although it's not the focus of this presentation, should you for any reason need to be place a maintenance request, that is where you'll be doing it. So again, the resident portal, not Wiser, is where your housing bill lives. Other thing I would like to bring to your attention is that on-campus housing is a commitment for the full academic year. Of course, there is an exception to this if you are joining us for only one semester through a student exchange program. But otherwise, the housing license agreement is for both the fall and spring semesters. So you'll be staying with us from fall 2026 through spring 2027. Other thing to note there is that residents must make the first housing payment at the start of each semester prior to moving into or returning to the resident halls. We are going to offer some more information about this move-in process and this prepayment requirement later in the presentation. But one thing I will share is the pre-move-in payment requirement for the fall semester, this more recent one. You are going to be able to see your on-campus housing bill shortly before the end of July. The first bill is due August 15th. We're going to get through the timeline of that a little bit later. Last thing to note here is that housing costs vary by room type. This is to account for differences in square footage, occupancy, meaning how many people are in a given room, and whether or not that room has access to a private bathroom. Floor plans and room rates, our webpage here, which again, circling that little QR code, hopefully you can see my arrow. That's a very detailed webpage that provides a very handy dandy breakdown, not just of the layout and floor plans and including virtual tours of our different room types available, but also indeed going into the bills for each room type. The webpage, super useful breakdown, highly recommend our website. It's pretty great. General rule of thumb for housing room costs is that the larger a room is, the fewer people are in it, and whether or not it has a private bathroom will determine the cost. Private bathroom access, larger room, fewer people in it, is going to be priced at a higher price point than a lower square footage, higher occupancy community bathroom access. But all of our residents can, of course, access the community bathrooms. Up next, a lot of info here. This is an example of the payment plans and time frame for on-campus housing. I'm going to go into all of this. It might be a little whoa at first, but we do have an example on the next slide to take you through what this looks like. One thing worth noting is that by default, on-campus housing is built on a semester payment plan. That means at the start of each semester, there's going to be a pre-move-in or return to campus requirement. For the fall, that is due by August 15th, and for the spring, that is due by January 15th. Again, this payment plan for the semester payment is the full semester cost of that given room type for the upcoming semester. So you'll be paying for the fall by August 15th and paying for the spring by January 15th. There is also an optional installment payment plan, which breaks up the full semester cost into 4 smaller payments per semester. We've provided a breakdown below of the different amounts for each installment. General rule of thumb is that the first installment of the given semester is going to be around 35% of the semester total, and that remaining 65% split between the next 3. There are some variations in between the two, like fall second semester might be, and this is me ballparking it, so don't worry, 21.6%, and it might then be 21.2, 21.2 for the rest, just to get that round number. But basically, installment payment plan, which you can request by sending us an email, or actually, I believe we'll be sending out a form closer to the after bills go live if you would like to switch to the installment plan. But basically, everybody's on the semester plan by default. If you'd like the installment plan, which is a little more complicated as detailed here and also on our website, you can request that via a form. But we are going to be sharing more information about that and the ability to opt into that payment plan in a form along with the housing bill once that is finalized early next week. Next, what does it look like to actually be on this installment plan? How does a typical semester appear for the on-campus housing bill? Well, Bobby Beacon, our mascot, is, for this hypothetical, a resident of a double community room type who has chosen for the installment payment plan. Bobby's room type of double community has a total cost of $12,268 for the full academic year, which comes to $6,134 per semester. If we take a look back here, we look at the installment breakdown here, and we look at it again here, that is how the double community breaks down for Bobby. So that is the same information as on the last slide, just more specific to this room type, so you can get a picture of what this will look like. Now, obviously, total cost of the semester broken down to those 4 installments. We have, again, that 35%, that 21.8, 21.6, 21.6. My math earlier was wrong. That's why we have computers. As you can see, this does all add up to that 6134. We're trying to keep these numbers as nice and round as possible, but you see we got a 21 cent, 90%, etc. One other thing I'd like to specify, semester plan and the installment plan equal the same semester total. No room type is, no payment plan is cheaper than the other. It is the exact same amount. It's just sort of the question of when, not how much. Now, when Bobby is joining us in the fall semester, what's that going to look like? Well, before moving in, Bobby's going to log into his resident portal and make the first fall payment, which is required to move into the residence halls. We'll touch on that a little bit later, but basically that means that the first August 15th payment Bobby's going to pay before August 15th, naturally, or on, but has to pay in order to be issued his keys at move-in and occupy the residence halls. In early September, because that's when the next payment plan or installment plan is due, Bobby's going to check his resident portal to pay that next installment. And while he's in there, Bobby also decides to set up automatic payments for the remaining fall installments. We're going to touch on auto pay a little bit more later in the presentation, but it's a useful tool, particularly for folks on the installment payment plan. Towards the end of the semester, Bobby logs into his portal again, just before the final installment date on November 15th, to double check that he's all set, that his auto pay ran correctly, and that he's all squared away before the final semester deadline of November 15th. For the spring semester, that's April 15th. Bobby is going to note on his semester that, oops, he lost a room key. He had to get a replacement. That was a $25 fee. And he's so glad he checked, because then he's all squared away at $0 balance at the end of the semester. So once again, if we're looking here, installment plan, what does that look like? Well, it looks like this. It looks like checking your resident portal around each installment deadline, with emphasis on prior to move-in and prior to the final deadline of the semester. It's going to look like this for both semesters, and we'll delve into how Bobby's auto pay worked a little later in the presentation. If Bobby was on the semester payment plan, this first one, he'd just be paying that $6,134 upfront, nothing to worry about for the rest of the semester. Bobby is also welcome to, if you would like, choose the installment plan and then pay the semester total up front. It would just show a credit on the account that would be gradually eaten up by the costs as they appeared. Anyway, moving on. Let's take a look at the resident portal and some of the functions for that. Again, all of you who've been to the resident portal to sign your housing license agreements required to actually get confirmed for on-campus housing in the first place. But beyond just the ability to sign your housing license agreement, the main functions of the resident portal are to check your on-campus housing balance and to make a payment towards your on-campus balance. You might recognize this screen. This is how you get into your resident portal. This is also how you get into your resident portal. We like the layout. It's a new system. I think it's very chic. But some secondary functions for the resident portal are managing your payment methods. That's called your wallet in the resident portal, and also setting up automatic payments like we talked about. We'll delve into those in a bit. But for now, one of the top questions you might be wondering, how do I see my balance? Well, the resident portal makes that really easy. Once you log in, right on the homepage, you will see this screen right here. This will display your current balance and also have the option to make a payment right there with a one-click payment. It will also tell you if you have autopay active. What this looks like, and we'll break down sort of the specifics here. It's going to display some information in Word above the dollar amount here, and that's going to tell you the current payment status. So if you're seeing a $0 balance with no amount due, sure enough, that means you are all up to date on your bill and there is no amount due because you have $0 due. An unpaid balance would show a total listed as amount due here. So I'm going to cover up the no, and that's what it'll look like. And you will also see a dollar amount there reflecting the amount due at that time. Any extra funds on your account, this text up here would say credit balance, and then it would show a dollar amount, which would actually be, if this makes sense, a negative dollar amount because you don't owe that money. That isn't due. In fact, you've overpaid, and that will automatically go towards your next housing bill. So once you log into your portal, you'll see all this information right at a glance. Super, super helpful. Kind of three categories it can fall into are you're all set, no amount due. You have an amount due, whether that's from a upcoming, or hopefully this doesn't reach you, but past due payment, or a credit balance. I do encourage you to read this every time you log into your portal. We've had some folks read credit balance or not quite understand what that means and then pay money they've already paid us, which just automatically go towards their next payment or gets refunded. You cannot overpay us. This tells you how much you owe, if anything, at a given time. Also, I again mentioned the auto pay at a glance thing, super helpful. This little square here will appear on most pages in your resident portal just because it's the main info there is helpful to have on the page. Now, a little more in depth, you can go to your ledger. That's going to be a more detailed breakdown of your bill, a record of the full transaction history for your room. That's going to include amounts of payments and costs. That's going to include dates that they came due or were adjusted to your account, as well as the overall effect of your total balance of all charges and payments that are posted on your account so far. You can access the ledger on the payments page, and that payments page is also where you're going to see more advanced options, such as managing the payment methods in your wallet, setting up auto pay, and a refund account. We'll talk about that in a bit. Refund account, kind of self-explanatory. That's where the money goes if we owe you money at the end of the semester. Academic year, my bad. But what the ledger looks like is I've taken a little screenshot here. You might see handy dandy little color coding here. Charges show up on your ledger in red, payments show up on your ledger in black. So taking a look here, source of this just means where's that from? Now, property means that's from the on-campus housing bill. You means presumably you made a payment. As you can see, we have a charge in red here of $1488.50. This is from a prior academic year for the final fall and or spring installment charge. And then same day, due April 15th, a payment was made by you for that same amount. And this sort of tracks chronologically your on-campus housing bill. So you might see, okay, we had a charge here that was added to the overall record of your bill as a balance, and then that was paid off by this payment. So this is what it looks like. This is what you want to see when you log into your ledger of a successful payment. Basically, charge came in here, payment came in here, this minus this equals this. Love to see it. Again, charge is red, payments black. Very straightforward. I like it a lot. One other thing to note here is that for the installment plan, charges are posted on the first business day of the month. We are working to post that first August 15th payment on everybody's account in July, just so you have a little extra time to take a look at your bill and plan everything out accordingly. But let's say if we're looking at this here, this April installment charge would show in April, probably April 1st, or let's say April 2nd. Let's say April 1st was a Saturday or something. That math doesn't work, but ignore that. Anyway, making a payment, this is sort of your wallet in the resident portal. We've also broken it down and gone electric and acoustic, the different ways you can make payments, not in person, but online, you can pay us through the resident portal. That offers these options to pay. That is via debit or credit card, and I provide a list of the resident portal's accepted card types here. An electronic bank transfer, an ACH transaction, that's called. That stands for Automated Clearinghouse, if you're curious. Also, it takes Apple Pay. So that's a handy dandy feature that I actually didn't know about when we were first setting it up. So that's fine. One other thing I do need to clarify about how online payments in the resident portal work is that they are subject to transaction fees. Those are up to these individuals more so than us. Transaction fees are determined by the financial institutions involved and not our office. So if we head back here, this payment, oh, $8.95 fee. Well, did we put that on? No, I'm afraid not. Do we see a dime of that? No, I'm afraid not. That is probably Amex, MasterCard, Visa, one of them. So again, online payments, super handy dandy, convenient, one-tap payments we'll get into in the resident portal. But one thing to note is that these options do come with a fee not determined by us. Now, if you'd like to pay in person or via the mail, we can accept payment via cashier's check or money order. We are unable to accept cash, do need to stress that, but the non-online payment methods we can accept are cashier's check and money order. If that's being mailed, this is our office's mailing address as it appears. I will also say this is on our website. Most of this info is on the relevant handy dandy pages of our website. We have one called Housing Payment Information that I heartily recommend. But if you're thinking of mailing or coming by and handing us a check for your on-campus housing payment, you got to make it payable to PCER. Our office cannot accept checks or money orders made out to UMass Boston or UMB Housing unless it contains PCER on the payable to line. All that important information, and indeed, again, most of the important information contained in this webinar is detailed on our website. That is a big one to keep in mind, particularly if, say, you have some funds coming in from a scholarship or a 529 plan or some such. It has to be made payable to PCER, or we'll reach out to you saying, so sorry, we can't accept this. How would you like us to get it back to you? Now, making a payment, I mentioned one-tap payments. Super useful. We love it. The Pay Now button is available on the Home and Payments pages. If we head back a few, Pay Now takes you to this screen. The one-tap payment allows you to select which payment methods to use from your wallet. Again, that should be fresh in your mind. And if you'd like to pay the full balance owed or a specific other amount, when you hit Pay Now, a one-tap payment does default to the total currently owed. But if you wanted to, for some reason, make part of a payment, let's say, I don't know, you have two parents, one of whom wants to make one chunk of it, one of whom wants to make another, up to you. Your options for that are to hit Edit on this payment details page, and then you can hop in and put a custom amount to pay. This again goes through the same payment methods as we discussed on the last slide. Now, wallet and auto pay. Well, the wallet, also accessible on the payment page, that's where you set up those payment methods we went over earlier, whether that be in the resident portal credit or debit card, bank account for an ACH transfer, or Apple Pay. You can also set up automatic payments. I've sort of teased this one a bit just because I think it's kind of neat and it's a pretty good system for doing that. Residents on the installment plan, again, do find auto pay a little more useful than folks on the semester plan, just because they're looking at 8 payments over the course of both semesters rather than 2. So what does it look like when you set up an automatic payment? Well, you can obviously connect the payment method that it'll be coming from, and then there are certain criteria you have to set up in order for the auto pay to go through. This is a little involved, but it is very straightforward, offers a great degree of customizability, and does prevent any kind of issues there. It also has another feature I'll touch on in a sec because we have another example. Bobby's coming back. But the criteria it asks you for, a time frame, that is the start and the end. Let's say you make that first payment like Bobby did yourself, and then you want to make the next payments automatically so you can set it and forget it. Well, you basically tell the portal when you would like this auto pay to start and end, including the months and the day of the month you want them to trigger on, as well as the payment method involved and the maximum payment amount for these payments. Basically, think of that as a ceiling that it will pay up to but not go over. Again, we have examples on the next slide, just so all this can be as clear as possible. One other really cool thing that is the feature I like about auto payment is that it will only trigger if you have an unpaid balance and will only pay up to the set amount. So again, that means that let's say you have, we'll get into it with Bobby, but let's say you have an auto pay set up for $1,000 every month, and then you only have a $100 bill. Well, it's only going to pay $100. And if you have no money due, it will not trigger a payment. So it's smart in that way, which students find really useful. But what does this look like in practice? Well, Bobby's back to help us out. As we mentioned last time, he paid his first fall semester cost manually, that 35% pre-move-in requirement, and then set up an auto pay in early September to take care of the remaining fall semester charges. Now, if we take a look back at these criteria here, let's go over what Bobby did for them and how that affected his auto pay. He set up an automatic payment to trigger on a monthly basis for a maximum amount of $1,338, just based on his installment amount, because Bobby's really well prepared and has read our page to know how much his installment plan is. And the day of the month he's set for this to trigger on is the 5th of each month. And he wants that to span from September to November. Now, if we put this in practice, how does this pay off his semester total? Well, looking at the first installment, August 15th, Bobby paid this one manually prior to setting up the auto pay. He did that on September 1st with these parameters. That means that when the September 15th payment rolled around, Bobby's recurring payment triggered for the first time on September 5th to pay exactly the amount due for this installment. That is, again, because autopay is smart and is only going to pay what you owe and not a cent more than the ceiling you set for it. Third fall semester installment, that's going to look largely the same, triggered for the second time on October 5th to pay exactly the $1324.94. Again, note that this is just due to how the percentages break down, to pay exactly the third installment. And this happened once again in November. We love to see it. It's grand. The recurring payment feature, very smart, triggered November 5th for the third and last time, because again, remember, he told us, don't do it after November. That's the end of the fall semester, to pay the final fall installment. Now, some old disclaimers at the bottom here. Again, auto pay only ever pays the specific amount owed at a given time and cannot overpay. This is, again, why Bobby's paid the exact amount due instead of just that $13.38 each time. This is not something we've always had, and I really like it. I will say, again, you're welcome to do this on the semester plan if you'd like, but folks on the installment plan do find this more useful. Now, big question, and we're going to get into some exceptions for the earlier rules here. I'm sure I haven't checked the Q&A yet because it's not the end of the presentation, but I would wager there's a couple in there about this. Can you use financial aid or loan, grant, scholarship funds to pay for housing? It depends. Only financial aid, and that's sort of an umbrella term here, that remains after your other UMass Boston tuition and fees have been paid can go towards the housing bill. So again, if we want to put that differently, we can refer to this as excess aid. I like to think of it as a bucket analogy, where these loan, financial aid, grant, scholarship funds would first fill up a bucket marked UMass Boston, right? If there's any overflow, which is to say everything there has been paid off and you have excess, you can basically kick a bucket marked housing under that bucket to catch the overflow. So again, you can use financial aid funds to pay for on-campus housing, just a little indirect because the bills are separate. We'll touch on how to make that easier later. But for now, just think of this as, yes, you can if you have enough to cover the UMass Boston side of things first. Confirmed residents, all of you have received this info already, can opt into the automatic excess aid transfer. This is the theoretical kicking that housing bucket under the other bucket. This auto excess aid transfer form, we sent an email about after you're confirmed for housing. We'll send another one before the deadline to opt in. But this basically lets you fill out a form in Wiser to have any such excess funds transferred directly by the bursar's office to your housing bill. This transfer occurs over several batches throughout the semester. So this starts, I think, after ad drop and usually wraps a good month or so before finals of a given semester. But that's like a weekly batch that might have, a little bit, I'll touch on all the info up front first before getting more specific, but the automatic excess aid transfer occurs in several batches throughout the semester, and Resident Portal will show funds once they have been received for your account in a given batch of transfer. So what does this mean? Well, if we were to go back to the ledger, you would basically see after the bursar's office sent us funds for your account in part of the automatic transfer, you'd see another payment come in here. It would be marked excess aid transfer. Hopefully you'd be able to see that, but that would appear in here as a payment, which is again in black, only after the actual funds have come through that automatic transfer process. Excuse me. So again, what that kind of looks like is the actual layout of that. Starting usually a week or so after ad drop, we will get a weekly batch of funds from the bursar's office marked for students' accounts. Let's say you have, I don't know, $2,000 expected in excess aid to automatically transfer over. You might get that $2,000 all done and dusted, all set in the first batch, and you're good. You don't have to worry about any more coming. But it might be that you get nothing that first batch, 500 the second week, 300 the third week. So we basically will update your account as we get that, and we notify everybody when the excess aid process starts up for a given semester, when you receive money for it in a given batch, and also when it ends for the semester. Regardless of the excess aid process, whether you're opted in or not, you are responsible for any remaining housing balance. Must pay it in full by the final billing deadlines of each semester. So that's November 15th for the fall and April 15th for the spring. What that means again is, let's say you get that $2,000 in excess aid, but the final installment of the fall semester, you have a little left over. Well, that is your responsibility to pay. The housing license agreement is taking on financial responsibility for the full academic year, meaning that you do have to abide by these deadlines, particularly the final fall and spring semester deadlines, regardless of your status being opted into excess aid. So again, this is a way to kick over any excess funds that may be on the way, but regardless of that, you are responsible for the semester housing costs. Now, one other thing I do want to stress here is that just looking at the previous data, on average, residents who opt in to kick that bucket marked housing under here, who opt in for this process receive funds for part of, but not all of the full semester balance. And therefore, everybody who opts into this usually does have a remaining balance, which must be paid out of pocket. So I like to think of this as a handy dandy bonus for which you can make some payments towards your on-campus housing bill, but do understand that you are responsible for the full bill. This process, really handy. We like it a lot. It does help students sort of navigate the difference in the bills in a little bit of an easier way. One thing I should say, let's say you do have excess aid funds coming, but for whatever reason, maybe you missed the deadline, maybe you're just not into it, you don't sign up for the automatic excess aid transfer. In that case, any refund that you're due here from that like quote unquote excess aid amount would be issued to you as a refund check from the bursar's office. That might come to you through direct deposit if you have that set up in Wiser, or a physical check mailed to you. You are welcome to use those funds to make a payment for your on-campus housing bill. Just because it wouldn't be automatic, you would have to deposit those funds and make a payment. So it's a little more indirect way that you can use financial aid funds to pay for housing. Another thing I'll touch on here, let's say you're not one of the, so again, on average, residents don't receive full semester coverage here. Let's say you're the exception of this. Your full semester is covered. We are going to be informed of that by the bursar's office financial aid office, sorry. And that upfront pre-semester payment requirement, you will not be expected to make if you have enough to fully cover the semester. We will be in contact with you if that's the case. That is, again, a more narrow group of people. So that's not really what we like to tell generally, just because in terms of setting expectations, this is likely where you're going to be, where financial aid will help to cover some of your bill, but shouldn't be anticipated to cover all of. And again, you are responsible for the full bill, regardless of if you have excess aid coming or not. But one other thing I do want to say there is, let's say you have a full semester's worth of excess aid coming, well, then we wouldn't expect you to make that pre-move-in payment requirement, and we just wait for the automatic transfer. Let's say something changes and you don't have the full semester covered after that. That is, again, up to you to pay before the final billing deadline. One other thing to say there, the 35% upfront payment for folks on the installment payment plan. Let's say you're on the installment payment plan and you're getting some excess aid. We're going to have the financial aid office send us a list of everybody's anticipated excess aid so that we can adjust your bills accordingly, just so that you are paying for whatever remains after financial aid comes through. We'll be sending more information about that generally, but just while we're discussing the somewhat, I would say, complicated subject of using financial aid to pay for on-campus housing, some disclaimers I wanted to add that, again, likely aren't going to apply to you, potentially just because these are more edge cases. But if you have full semester payment coming in, you won't be expected to make a payment up front in order to move in. And also that the first semester cost would be adjusted accordingly if you have excess aid on the way. So we've sent an email about this already to everybody with that form. We'll be sending much more as the bill goes live, but just so that you're aware, on-campus housing can indeed sometimes go towards or be affected by financial aid. This is how. We also do have all this information on our website, and I'm happy to go over it more at the end of the presentation, as this is a bit of a common question. But you can indeed use excess financial aid funds to help out on your on-campus housing bill. And if you opt in for this form, it's one less step you yourself have to do in order to get the funds where you'd like them to go. Moving on, I don't believe that anyone viewing this is going to have to worry about this, but just in case, hypothetically, what happens if you're late on a payment? Well, if it's the first payment of the semester, regardless of the payment plan chosen, as I mentioned a few times, all residents must complete the first housing payment of the given semester in order to occupy the residence halls. As such, the first payment must be completed prior to moving in. In other words, let's say Bobby Beacon wasn't as on top of his resident portal and he didn't pay the first on-campus housing bill before showing up for move-in, he would have to pay that before we were able to give him his keys. You mentioned the excess aid thing here. This is the general rule. If you have specific exceptions, those are exceptions to that, but those are sort of few and far between. So again, please keep in mind the default for everything is what is going to be addressed in this presentation. Anyway, so you can't really be late on the first payment of the semester because then you can move in. The mid-semester payment, let's say you're on the installment plan and you missed the second or third one, in that case, a housing financial hold would be placed on your Wiser account, which would prevent you from registering for classes until your unpaid housing balance is brought below $500. Keep in mind, housing financial hold, $500 is the amount there. If you have an unpaid bill of $499.99, no housing financial hold. $500 or 501 cent, housing financial hold. Keep in mind, let's say this happens to you, although I'm sure it won't. You're proactive enough to be at this webinar before the bills are even on. It wouldn't be a $500 payment necessarily. It would be a payment to bring your unpaid balance below $500. Let's say you have a late payment by the final billing deadline of the semester. This is the one to avoid if you can, just because, again, you know how much you pay. This is why you're here. If you have an unpaid balance following the final semester billing deadlines, again, that's November 15th for the fall, April 15th for the spring, you would lose access to your room and be unable to return to the residence halls if the unpaid amount is not resolved. So what happens if you're late on a payment? Short answer, nothing good. Long answer, first payment, you won't be able to move in. Mid-semester, you'll have a housing financial hold. Final billing deadline of the semester, you've proven you can't pay for the room and you will not have the room. So this is all sort of important stuff to really commit to memory, keep in mind, and stay on top of your bill. Now, let's say you are late on a payment. Well, you might get an automatic late fee. Accounts with an unpaid balance are subject to automatic late fees of $35. Those are put on by the system, usually, I think it's a set few weeks after the payment deadline. So I cannot stress again just how important it is to be timely with your housing payments. Let's say you have a past due unpaid balance. I don't believe this will occur to any of you, but if you have an unpaid balance following the end of the semester billing deadline for up to and it's unpaid for a month afterwards, then unfortunately we would be sending your account to collections as we can't really stay in charge of past due accounts for very long. As such, our office would be unable to accept direct payment as the past due amount must be resolved with the collections company. And housing financial holds for accounts in this situation can't be lifted until collections confirms the amount has been brought under $500. So again, what happens if you're late on a payment? Well, you are here, so I'm hoping you won't be. You might want to set up auto pay to make sure that that doesn't happen, or just really pay attention to your specific payment plan. All this information is again available on our website, and I'm happy to go back to any specific slides if folks would like at the end. But really important things to keep in mind. You are responsible for your on-campus housing semester and academic year costs. You're responsible to make all payments in a timely fashion. And while you can use financial aid to potentially pay off some of your on-campus housing, it is very much important to do so via all the required timelines. Now, let's go over some final things here. And again, I have a QR code here. I'm going to plug our website because it's very good. We have a floor plans and room rates page I've touched on a few times now. That includes both virtual tours and floor plans and everything for your on-campus housing, as well as room pricing. And it does helpfully break it down, not just by full academic year cost, but indeed by both of the available payment plans, both that semester plan and the installment plan. I would also plug, even though it's not necessarily related to this webinar, our future residence page. That has details on the furniture provided in your room, as well as a very thorough what to bring section that goes over recommended items to bring to on-campus housing, prohibited items like certain furniture items and appliances, and suggestions. So this is a really helpful one that you might want to start thinking about. Now, again, I think I mentioned the housing payment information page. That's going to look real familiar after this webinar. That's going to have a lot of the details on the billing process and again, what that excess aid process looks like. We're also going to be sending a lot more informative emails about this after bills go on accounts as the excess aid process starts up, because we want everybody to stay as informed as possible. But if you'd like to do that, not in our emails, that information, of course, lives on our website.